Millionaire CEO didn't believe in helping until he saw a little girl holding a baby. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you believe in quiet acts of courage and lullabies that carry more than just melody, and in the kind of family that forms when someone simply refuses to leave, this one is for you. Adrian Cole didn't believe in helping anymore. Not after what happened 3 years ago. Not after the media took what was left of his reputation and used it for firewood. Not after the adoption he fought for ended in a courtroom shouting match and a silence he could never explain to anyone. He hadn't stopped caring exactly. He had just learned to bury the instinct deep enough that it stopped getting in the way. Now he managed from a distance. A boardroom philanthropist. A man who paid for clean shelters and silent corridors for careful reports and discreet failures. Compassion on paper was safe. It didn't make promises it couldn't keep. So that morning when he stepped out of his private car and into the wind-whipped air of downtown, Adrian was focused on one thing only: the press conference. The one where he would stand in front of bright banners flanked by his executive team and nod solemnly while someone else described the warmth and hope his shelter supposedly delivered. He was late as usual. The press wouldn't notice. They always waited for the man who signed the checks. His assistant had sent 3 messages about the talking points which he hadn't read. Instead, he walked with the measured precision of a man who planned every word he would not say. His building loomed up ahead, glass and metal slicing the morning light, and the sidewalk bustled with cold shoulders and brisk paces. He was nearly at the steps when he saw her. At first he thought it was a pile of discarded blankets. The kind street corners collected overnight, folded in defeat by someone who no longer expected warmth. But then it moved. Just slightly. A small hand tugging at the edge of the fabric. Adrian slowed. Only for a second. He was not in the habit of noticing. But something about the shape, about how still it was, made him pause again. He stepped closer, and that was when he saw her. A girl no older than 7 curled at the base of the old boarded-up shelter that bore his name in faded letters above the door. She was barefoot, her toes red from the cold pavement. Her hair tangled in uneven waves, eyes wide but not afraid. She held something someone bundled in her arms. A baby wrapped in a blue sweatshirt far too big, the sleeves knotted around her to keep her close. The infant's face was barely visible, but her lips were parted slightly and her eyelids fluttered as if she were dreaming of sound. Adrian stood frozen. The girl looked up at him, her voice steady in the way only necessity could teach. She said, "I know who you are. You run this place, or you used to." He didn't respond. She kept going. "I don't want money. I don't want to stay. We just need one night, somewhere quiet, so they don't find us." Adrian blinked. The press conference, the investors, the suit that cost more than most people's rent. None of it made sense anymore. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice came out rougher than he expected. She hesitated as if names had weight. "Sophie," she said. "And this is Ella. She's 6 months. Maybe 7. I don't know for sure." She adjusted the sweatshirt around the baby. "She hasn't eaten since last night. I had some formula, but it ran out." Adrian swallowed. The right thing to do was to call the authorities. Let the system handle it. That's what systems were for. But then the baby let out a soft, dry hiccup. Not a cry, just a sound too small for the noise of the street. Sophie said, almost as if in warning, "She doesn't cry much anymore. That's not good, right?" He reached into his coat for his phone. Not to dial anyone yet. Just to hold it, like it would keep him grounded. Sophie pulled back slightly. "If you call them, we'll run. I mean it. You can't let them take her back there." Adrian didn't ask what she meant by there. Not yet. Instead, he did something that surprised even him. He crouched to eye level and said, "I know somewhere warm, with food. It's not far, just for the night." She didn't nod. She didn't thank him. She just stood slowly, never letting go of the baby, and said, "Okay, but I hold her. Always." He offered his hand. She didn't take it, but she followed. The car was still idling at the curb. Adrian opened the back door and gestured for her to enter. The driver blinked at him in the mirror but said nothing. Sophie climbed in with the awkward grace of someone who had never ridden in a luxury vehicle. She sat sideways, cradling Ella with both arms, her knees pulled up for support. Adrian got in beside her, adjusted the thermostat, and gave the driver an address that wasn't the press conference. His penthouse. Silence filled the cabin. Sophie didn't ask where they were going. She didn't look around. She only rocked the baby gently and whispered a tune under her breath. Adrian glanced over. It was not a lullaby he recognized, but something about it made his throat feel tight. At the building, the concierge rose to greet Adrian, but he gave a subtle shake of the head. The man sat down. Sophie followed him into the elevator, eyeing the walls like they might close in. She didn't speak until they reached the apartment. "Is it really just you?" she asked. Adrian nodded. She stepped inside and stopped. The space was clean, sleek, empty. The furniture was modern. The walls were blank. Sophie stared like she had just entered a museum where she wasn't allowed to touch anything. He pointed toward the guest room. "You can stay there tonight. The baby, too. There's a lock inside." That was when she looked at him. Not with trust, but with something close to curiosity. "You have locks that work?" she asked. Where we were, they only locked from the outside. Adrian didn't know how to answer, so he left her alone to settle. In the kitchen, he poured warm water and mixed the last of the formula samples he kept from an old corporate donation. He had never thought he'd use them. When he brought it in, she was already on the bed, Ella sleeping on her chest. Sophie took the bottle with one hand, still holding Ella with the other. "You didn't ask if I stole her," she said. Adrian paused. "Should I?" "Most people do," she replied. "They think if a kid's alone with a baby, she must have done something wrong." He sat in the chair by the window. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She didn't smile, but her grip on the bottle relaxed slightly. That night, after she fell asleep, curled tightly around the baby, Adrian stood in the hallway staring at the door. He hadn't called Child Protective Services. He hadn't reported her to anyone. Instead, he returned to his office and typed the name Grace Navarro into his old employee database. Something about the name Gracie on Ella's keychain had stuck in his mind. Grace had been a shelter coordinator 5 years ago. Sharp, compassionate, prone to arguments with upper management. She had left abruptly. No official record of why. The file listed no emergency contact, no record of a child. He kept searching, finding old emails, press releases, and finally a note buried in the HR files. Grace Navarro resigned after a conflict regarding client management protocols. No one followed up. He leaned back in his chair, the darkness of the room pressing in around him. Sophie's words echoed again. They only locked the doors from the outside. In the morning, he made toast and left it on the nightstand with a note. When he returned, Sophie had eaten half and was sitting upright, brushing Ella's hair with her fingers. "She didn't cry last night," she said. "She used to. Every night." But here she didn't. Adrian poured himself coffee. He didn't tell her that he hadn't slept either. Not because of the noise, but because silence had never felt this loud before. Sophie asked, "Are you going to take us back?" "No," he replied. "Not unless you want to go." She looked down at Ella, then back up. "Good. Because I'm not done keeping her safe yet." Neither of them said what came after that. But something had changed. And whether either of them knew it or not, they had both just taken the first step towards something they didn't yet have words for. Not rescue, not redemption. Something quieter, but no less powerful. Something that might just grow into family. The second morning began without fanfare. There were no alarms or footsteps echoing down the pristine marble hallway, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the city's distant breath through double-glazed windows. Adrian Cole was already awake, though he hadn't slept more than a few hours. He stood in the kitchen in a faded t-shirt he hadn't worn in years and watched the steam rise from his coffee cup like he was waiting for it to spell out what came next. The girl had not run. That was the first surprise. The second was that she had cleaned up. The blanket folded, the small towel he'd left on the dresser neatly draped over the edge of the baby's bassinet. And the baby Ella had woken without a sound. She lay there blinking, sucking softly on the last few drops of formula Sophie had carefully rationed the night before. When Adrian walked in to check, he found Sophie already dressed in the oversized hoodie she had arrived in, her sleeves pulled over her hands, bare feet tucked beneath her. She wasn't eating the toast he had brought earlier. She was holding it like it might vanish if she set it down. "Is this what rich people eat every day?" she asked without looking at him. "No," Adrian said. "Most don't bother with toast." "That's stupid," she muttered, then took a bite. Adrian didn't laugh, but something in his chest cracked open just a little. He sat across from her, the soft chair sighing under his weight. Ella shifted slightly in the bassinet nearby and let out a half whimper before settling again. "She's warm now," Sophie said. "Last night was the first time she didn't cry once." "Because you took care of her," he replied. "I've been taking care of her," Sophie said pointedly. "That didn't start here." Adrian nodded slowly, accepting the correction. "Where did it start?" She hesitated, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she was deciding how much to share. "A few places, mostly one that had bugs and yelling, the kind where people get numbers instead of names. I was number 21. She didn't even have a number. They said babies didn't count unless they had papers." "Did you have papers?" he asked. "No, just her keychain." Sophie glanced toward the tiny plastic charm attached to Ella's blanket. The name Gracie was printed in faded silver letters. She came with that. And a bracelet that got taken away. Adrian studied her. "Gracie. That name means something to you. It means someone loved her once," she said. "Even if they're not here now." He didn't ask more. Not yet. But he knew where he'd start searching. After breakfast, Adrian quietly stepped into his office and closed the door. He sat at his computer and pulled up the employee database for Safe Harbor Wellness Group. He searched for every Grace or Gracie who had ever been employed in any of the shelters he owned, especially those with children's programs. It didn't take long before the name popped up again. Grace Navarro, site manager, mid-level position, had worked at one of their first pilot centers, no longer employed. Adrian dug deeper, pulling old HR files and internal notes. The reason listed for her exit was vague failure to comply with reporting protocols. No clear misconduct, no follow-up, no legal action, just disappearance. And yet, something didn't add up. One email buried in a folder marked staff grievances caught his attention. It was from a different employee, anonymous, but it mentioned Grace, raising concerns about neglect in the infant care unit. She'd reported a supervisor was told to stay quiet, and 2 weeks later she was gone. Adrian leaned back in his chair. He hadn't seen this before. Or maybe he had, and ignored it. One of 100 reports that passed across his desk each month, all of them ending in neat resolutions his PR team crafted like bedtime stories. He returned to the living room to find Sophie curled up on the couch, sketching something with a blunt pencil he didn't remember owning. Ella was asleep on her chest, her small fingers gripping Sophie's hoodie. "You're not like them," Sophie said as he approached. "Them. The people in suits. The ones who smell like paper and talk to kids like they're already broken." Adrian stood quietly for a moment before replying. "You're not broken." "I didn't say I wasn't," she muttered. "I said they talked like we are. Do you want to talk about where you came from?" "No." "Do you want to stay here another night?" She looked up sharply. "Will you let me?" "Yes, I won't make you leave." Sophie nodded, once then went back to her drawing. Later that morning, Adrian's assistant Dana arrived. She had worked for him long enough to know when not to ask questions. She came with 2 large bags, formula diapers, baby clothes in various sizes, and a few basic items for Sophie. She didn't speak directly to the girl until Sophie looked her in the eye and asked, "Are you like him?" Dana tilted her head. "Depends what you mean." "Do you work for the system? I work for him," Dana said, glancing toward Adrian. "And I make sure people get what they need." Sophie nodded, still unsure. Dana gently set the items down and said, "I brought you a new hoodie. Pink. Just in case you want it." Sophie eyed the hoodie but didn't reach for it. Not yet. Trust, Adrian thought, came in inches. After Dana left, Adrian helped set up a space in the guest room for Ella. A portable crib, fresh linens, a soft stuffed rabbit Dana had picked out. Sophie watched silently as he arranged everything, then asked, "Are you good at this?" He paused. "No, I'm learning." "Most people pretend," she said. "They say they know what to do, but they don't. I used to pretend. Now I'm just trying." In the afternoon, Sophie explored the apartment. She walked with slow, quiet steps, always carrying Ella as if afraid someone might call her back if she set the baby down. She peeked into the study, the laundry room, the small balcony where Adrian sometimes drank his coffee in the rain. She didn't touch anything, but she noticed everything. At one point, she stopped in the hallway and said without turning, "There are no cameras in here." "No," Adrian said. "I don't like being watched in my own home." "Good," she said. "Then maybe she'll sleep better." That evening, they ate soup at the kitchen table. Sophie fed Ella with a bottle, one hand holding the baby steady, the other resting on her back. She ate slowly, like someone used to meals disappearing before she could finish. Adrian didn't speak much, but he didn't leave either. Afterward, Sophie placed Ella in the crib and returned with her sketch. She handed it to Adrian and stood silently as he looked at it. It was a picture of the apartment's window, the city lights, a small figure holding a baby standing next to a taller figure in a suit. In the corner, she had written, "No one came." So we did. Adrian didn't say anything. He just looked at her and said, "Do you want to stay tomorrow too?" She didn't answer with words. She walked to the guest room, picked up Ella, and lay down on the bed like it was already hers. When he checked later that night, they were both asleep. Ella's tiny hand was wrapped around one of Sophie's fingers. A single light from the hallway spilled across the blanket, and the soft lullaby Adrian had cued on his phone played on loop in the background. He stood there for a long time before turning off the light and returning to his office. There were more names to search, more files to open. Somewhere Grace Navarro had vanished. Somewhere someone had turned away when she asked for help. But Sophie hadn't, and now neither would he. And now... We'll return in just a moment. If you're still here, please consider subscribing. It's how we're able to keep doing this. Back to the story now. The third day began before the sun rose. Adrian was already in the living room nursing a cup of black coffee he never quite finished. The apartment was quiet, not the kind of silence that used to comfort him, but something more delicate, something he didn't want to break. It was the silence of two people and a baby breathing peacefully down the hall. He had lived alone for years and always told himself he liked it. That solitude gave him control. But now he realized he had never actually known silence. What he had was emptiness. This was something else. This was waiting. A soft creak came from the guest room, and a moment later, Sophie padded into the kitchen bare feet, nearly silent on the tile. She had Ella cradled in one arm and her drawing clutched in the other. Her eyes were still puffy with sleep, her hoodie slightly askew, and a mismatched sock hung from one foot. Adrian looked up from his seat. "You're up early," he said. "She was hungry," Sophie replied, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. She handed him the picture. A new one. This time it showed a building with lights on and only one window. In that window were the same small figures as before, one taller, one smaller, and the baby between them. In the sky above, she had drawn stars, tiny scribbled X's, some of them trailing off into the corner. "She likes the stars," Sophie said softly. "I think she used to sleep under them." Adrian studied the drawing. "Do you think she remembers? I think babies remember things we forget." Sophie answered, shifting Ella gently in her arms, "Like how it feels to be safe. Or not safe." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. A few minutes later, he prepared oatmeal for Sophie and warmed another bottle for Ella. The baby drank quietly, her tiny fingers still clutching the worn plastic keychain that had been looped around the edge of her blanket since the day they met. Adrian had noticed it more than once. A simple keychain shaped like a heart faded pink with a name stamped into the side. Gracie. It was the only clue to where Ella might have come from. Sophie had mentioned it the day before, but only briefly, as if she didn't want to say too much. Now, as she fed the baby, she turned the keychain over in her fingers, staring at it like it might start talking. She had this when I found her, Sophie said. In a crib, with a broken wheel. The blanket was wet. She had a rash. No one came when she cried. I did. Adrian sat across from her, coffee in hand. Where was this A shelter in West Haven? It had your logo on the wall. That's how I knew your name. It was supposed to be for families, but they kept the babies in a different room. The workers didn't come unless someone got sick. Adrian swallowed hard. West Haven had been one of their early shelters. One of the ones he'd stopped visiting in person when things got too complicated. Do you remember the name of the woman in charge? He asked. She had long hair and a voice that always sounded tired, Sophie said. She called Ella the quiet one, like that was a good thing. Did you ever hear her name? Sophie shook her head, but someone else worked there, a lady named Grace. She was nice to the older kids. She used to sneak snacks into the playroom. She would sing when she thought no one was listening. Adrian's heart jolted. Do you remember the song? Sophie thought for a moment. Then she began humming softly. It was halting and off-key, but unmistakable. A lullaby. One Adrian had heard once years ago at a staff gathering where a young shelter manager had sung to calm a crying infant while others stood awkwardly nearby. That's her, Adrian said. Grace Navarro. She used to run West Haven, until she left. Sophie looked at him carefully. Did she leave, or did they make her? I don't know, Adrian admitted, but I'm going to find out. That afternoon, Adrian made a call to his legal team under the pretense of reviewing old employment files. He asked specifically for all documentation related to staff turnover at West Haven from 4 years ago. The voice on the other end hesitated before saying they'd look into it. Adrian didn't mention Grace's name, not yet. He wanted to see what the official report said before giving them a reason to scrub the truth. Meanwhile, Dana returned with more supplies, clothes in Sophie's size this time, and a new set of baby bottles. She brought a second portable crib just in case Ella wanted to nap in the living room. Sophie still didn't trust Dana completely, but when the woman handed her a pack of socks that actually matched, she cracked a faint smile. You think I'm staying long enough to need socks? Sophie asked. I think you should have them even if you're not, Dana said gently. Everyone deserves warm feet. That night, as Adrian reviewed more files and Sophie played with Ella on the floor, something shifted. The baby began to gurgle softly, a tiny bubble of laughter escaping as Sophie tickled her gently. It was the first time he had heard Ella laugh. Sophie looked up, startled. She doesn't do that, she whispered. Not since the day I took her. Maybe she knows she's safe now, Adrian said. She's not safe yet, Sophie replied, but she's closer. Later, after Ella had fallen asleep in the crib, Sophie stood in the hallway outside Adrian's office. She didn't knock. She just leaned against the doorframe and said, I know why you're doing this. Adrian looked up. You're not trying to save us, she said. You're trying to fix something. From before. Something you didn't stop. Her voice wasn't accusing, just observant. Adrian closed his laptop slowly. You're not wrong, he said. There was a time I thought helping meant putting my name on a building and leaving someone else to care. But that's not care, Sophie said. That's branding. He chuckled softly, not at her, but at the honesty. You're smarter than most adults I've met. That's because I've had to be, she replied. When no one comes, you learn fast. The next morning, Adrian received a confidential email from his legal contact. Attached were files from West Haven's management logs. He scanned quickly, eyes catching on line after line of vague explanations, exit interviews filled with half-truths. But one document stood out. A resignation form signed by Grace Navarro. The reasons cited irreconcilable ethical differences with program administration. Attached to it was a scanned complaint she had filed weeks before her departure. It outlined systemic neglect, failure to respond to medical alerts, and retaliation against whistleblowers. No formal investigation had followed. The report had been marked resolved internally. Adrian sat back in his chair, sick to his stomach. He had approved a summary of that report. He remembered now. Just one of many in a meeting that had run long and ended with a catered lunch. He had signed off without reading the full details. Somewhere behind that paper trail, Grace had disappeared. And now a baby with her keychain was sleeping in his guest room. And a girl who should have never had to know the difference between real and pretend safety was the only reason that baby was alive. That night, he did not sleep. He sat outside the guest room for hours just listening, not guarding, not planning, just being there. And when Sophie came out once to check on the bottle warmer, she didn't say anything. She just handed him a blanket and whispered, "She still hums that song in her sleep. I think she remembers Grace, too." Adrian nodded. "Then we'll find her." Sophie looked at him closely the way she always did when trying to decide if someone was lying. "And if we don't?" she asked. "Then we keep her memory safe," he replied, "and make sure Ella never goes back to a place that forgot her." Sophie didn't smile, but she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and said, "Okay, then I'll stay another night." As she walked back to the guest room, Adrian looked again at the small plastic keychain sitting on the counter. It had been worn down by time, chewed on by tiny gums, rubbed by a sister's thumb. It was just a trinket. But to the girl in mismatched socks and the baby who laughed for the first time, it was a map. And now it was his too. The fourth day began with a knock that didn't belong. Not the cautious tapping of Sophie's small knuckles or the mechanical rhythm of Dana's routine deliveries, but a deliberate knock, heavy and firm, like someone who expected to be answered. Adrian was halfway through changing Ella's bottle when he heard it. Sophie had just settled into the oversized armchair with the baby and a picture book she had found tucked under a stack of magazines. Her head lifted sharply, eyes narrowing the way they always did when unfamiliar sounds entered her world. Adrian placed the bottle on the counter and crossed to the door. On the other side stood a woman in a charcoal coat with a badge clipped to her collar and a manila folder clutched under one arm. She was in her late 40s with short salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much and softened too little. "Adrian Cole?" she asked without smiling. "Yes," he replied. "I'm Fiona Parks with the state's Child and Family Welfare Division. May I come in?" Her voice was flat but not unfriendly, a tone sharpened by policy and long hours. Adrian hesitated, then stepped aside. Fiona entered without removing her coat, her eyes sweeping across the apartment like a scanner. She spotted Sophie immediately, her posture shifting as if a script had been triggered. "Hello there," she said, approaching slowly. "You must be Sophie." Sophie didn't answer. She clutched Ella closer and looked at Adrian. "She's from the system," she said quietly. "She smells like bleach and paper." Fiona paused, clearly used to resistance. "I'm here to make sure everyone is safe. That's all." Safe for who? Sophie asked, her voice steady, but low. Adrian stepped in before the tension could thicken. "Why are you here, Miss Parks?" "We received an anonymous call about an unreported minor possibly being housed off the books," she said. "Under normal circumstances, this would be a routine check, but since it's you, Mr. Cole, there's interest from higher up." "There's no crime in helping a child," he said. "You didn't report her," Fiona countered. "That's not nothing, especially for someone with your visibility." Sophie stood up, still holding Ella. "He didn't take us," she said. "I found him. I asked him not to call anyone. I made him promise." Fiona turned to her, and for a moment something shifted in her face. Not pity, but a flicker of recognition. Why, she asked. "Because no one came last time," Sophie said. "So I stopped waiting." Adrian's jaw tightened. Fiona turned back to him. "Regardless of intention, this situation needs to be documented. I'll need to conduct an assessment, talk to the child alone, examine the infant, review the environment." "No," Sophie said instantly. "She stays with me. You can ask me anything, but you don't take her." Fiona sighed. "That's not how this works." "It is now," Adrian said. "You can do your assessment, but you do it with her consent, or not at all." Fiona gave him a long look. "You're bending the rules." "I built them," Adrian replied. "Now I'm rewriting them." After a moment, Fiona pulled a small notebook from her folder and gestured toward the dining table. "Let's start with the basics then." Sophie sat, her arms never loosening around Ella. Fiona asked questions, name, age, when she last attended school, if she had any known relatives. Sophie answered in clipped sentences, only hesitating when asked about where she had lived before. A few places, she said. Mostly walls. Some smelled like soap. Some didn't. One had a lady named Grace who sang songs that made the crying stop. She left. Then things got worse. Fiona's pen paused. Grace Navarro. I don't know her last name, Sophie said, but she had a keychain like Ella's. Pink, with her name on it. Fiona looked over at Adrian. You know this person we're looking for her, Adrian said. She used to work at one of my shelters. She filed a complaint. Then she disappeared. That's outside the scope of this visit, Fiona said. But it's concerning. So is everything else, Adrian replied, including the fact that a 7-year-old had to steal a baby just to feel safe. Fiona didn't argue. She moved on to the next section of her assessment, checking Ella's vitals with a small portable kit. Sophie allowed it, but only if Adrian held the baby while it happened. The baby didn't cry. She just blinked her fingers, finding the edge of Adrian's collar and clutching it like an anchor. Fiona made notes. Underweight but alert. Skin warm. No signs of recent injury. Slight rash on the neck, likely from extended contact with damp fabric. Nothing emergent. She clicked her pen and closed her folder. You'll need to file for emergency guardianship if you plan to keep her here more than another night. We've already started, Adrian said. My lawyer is drawing up the paperwork. Then I'll need access, Fiona said. The state will need to monitor this until there's a decision. Understood, Adrian said, but his tone carried an edge. Fiona stood and looked at Sophie. You're very brave, she said, but you shouldn't have had to be. Sophie didn't answer. She just picked up Ella and walked to the window. Fiona turned to Adrian. You may think you're saving them, but there's a difference between shelter and stability. I know, he said, and I plan to give them both. After she left, the apartment felt heavier. Sophie sat on the floor near the window. Ella nestled against her. She's not bad, Sophie said quietly. But she doesn't get it. What do you mean? Adrian asked. She thinks safety comes in checklists, Sophie said. But safe doesn't feel like a clipboard. It feels like someone staying, even when they don't have to. Adrian nodded slowly. I'm not going anywhere, he said, even if it gets complicated. It's already complicated, Sophie replied. But you're still here, so maybe it's okay. That evening, Dana returned with a soft carrier for Ella and a new set of storybooks. She found Sophie sitting in the hallway, reading aloud, her voice quiet but steady. Ella dozed against her shoulder, the book open on her lap. Dana placed the new items down gently and said, You've got a good voice for stories. She likes the ones with stars, Sophie replied. She listens better when they talk about the sky. Dana smiled. Then I'll find more with stars. Later that night, Adrian reviewed the guardianship papers with his lawyer over the phone. Marcus Llewellyn, his legal advisor for nearly 10 years, was not impressed. You realize what this looks like? Marcus said. A millionaire CEO takes in a girl and a baby without reporting it. The press will eat it alive. Let them, Adrian said. I'm not doing it for them. That's not the point. Marcus argued. This is exposure, liability. Do you even know if you're the only one looking for this baby? That's what we're trying to find out, Adrian replied. So far, no one has. You're risking everything Marcus said. You think this ends in a photo op? It doesn't. It ends in court. Then I'll be there, Adrian said. With them. There was a long pause on the line. Then Marcus said quietly, You used to care about legacy, about protecting what you built. I still do, Adrian said. I'm just building something different now. When he hung up, he sat alone in the quiet for a while. The lights of the city pulsed beyond the windows, and somewhere down the hall, Sophie was humming again. The same song, the one Grace had sung, the one Ella always settled to. Adrian closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't make him restless. It made him want to stay. The next day would bring more questions, more forms, more doubt. But for now, in the stillness of a room not designed for children, a man who once walked away from everything that hurt was learning how to stay. And just outside his office door, two girls who should have been forgotten were already beginning to believe he meant it. Before we continue, please subscribe if you've enjoyed the story so far. Your support is the reason we're still here. Now let's get back into it. The fifth day began with the smell of cinnamon. Adrian didn't cook often, but this morning he had woken with a strange desire to create something warm that didn't come from a takeout bag or a silent fridge. He stood over the stove watching the bread brown in the pan, thin swirls of butter curling up the sides, and for a moment he almost believed the kitchen felt lived in. Behind him, soft footsteps padded across the floor. Sophie stood in the doorway, holding Ella against her chest, the baby's head resting on her shoulder like a worn crown. Adrian turned, spatula still in hand. "You ever had French toast?" he asked. Sophie shrugged. "Only once. It was soggy." "This one won't be," he promised. She didn't smile, but she sat down at the table without being told, and that in itself felt like progress. She set Ella gently in the soft carrier Dana had brought the day before, and pulled her knees up to her chest on the chair. "She coughed twice last night," Sophie said quietly, but she didn't wheeze. "I think the air is better here." Adrian nodded. "I'll call the pediatrician just in case. Dr. Harlan, she's good. I trust her." "I don't trust doctors," Sophie said. "They always talk around you, like you're not in the room." "Then she won't," Adrian said. "You can stay with Ella the whole time. No needles. Just checking her lungs and heart. What if they try to take her?" "No one's taking her," Adrian said. "Not while she's with you. Not while you're with me." After breakfast, Sophie took the drawing she had been working on and quietly placed it on the table near Adrian's laptop. It showed a hallway this time, long, narrow, with a door at the end and a shadow leaning just past the frame. She had drawn herself at the front, holding Ella facing the door. Above it, in block letters, she had written the word "back." Adrian picked it up slowly. "What's this?" he asked. "The place we left," she said. "The place they want us to go back to." "You think they'll try to make you?" "That's what they always do," she replied. "They call it temporary. But then you get moved again. And again. And no one remembers your name, just your bed number." Adrian set the picture down gently. "You're not a number anymore." "Not here," she said. "But they don't know that." Later that morning, Dr. Harlan arrived with a small black bag and a calm demeanor that filled the apartment with quiet authority. Sophie eyed her warily, but did not leave the room. Adrian introduced them, and when Dr. Harlan bent to examine Ella, she did so without asking to take her. She let Sophie hold the baby the entire time, simply moving her stethoscope gently and whispering encouragements as she worked. "She's light," Dr. Harlan said softly, "but responsive. Her lungs are clear. Her eyes are tracking well. No fever. She needs more sleep and calories, but there's no immediate danger." "She's breathing funny sometimes," Sophie said. "Short little gasps. That's probably reflux from the formula changes," the doctor explained. "Her body's adjusting to better food. It's not unusual, but I'll give you some gentle drops just in case." Sophie nodded, then paused. "What happens now?" "Now the doctor said you keep doing exactly what you've been doing, loving her, holding her, talking to her. She hears you even when she's sleeping." Sophie looked down at Ella, then at Adrian. "She remembers Grace," she said. "She remembers everything." After the doctor left, Adrian found himself sitting on the floor of the nursery space they had built in the corner of the guest room. Sophie sat across from him, absently pulling at the edge of a blanket, as Ella slept in the crib between them. "I wasn't supposed to find her," Sophie said. "I went into the wrong room. I was looking for a sink. My hands were dirty. One of the older boys had thrown a plate at me. I wanted to wash off the food before anyone saw." Adrian didn't interrupt. He waited. The room was dark, she continued. There were cribs lined up, maybe 6 of them. Only one baby was crying. The rest were asleep or just staring. But she was red and loud. Except when I touched her, she stopped. Just like that. Sophie's voice caught and she swallowed hard. I didn't know her name. There were no labels. just that pink keychain stuck in the folds of her blanket. I thought maybe it meant something. Maybe she had someone once. And you decided to take her, Adrian said gently. No, Sophie replied. I decided not to leave her. That's different. Adrian looked at her carefully. Where did you go out the back? She said. The emergency door was broken. I had watched the staff come in and out for weeks. They never fixed the alarm. Did anyone see you? I don't think so. I ran until I found a bus stop. I waited until the driver looked tired enough not to ask questions. He let me on. I told him I had money at the other end. I didn't, but he didn't check. And then you came here. Not right away, Sophie said. I slept under the train station with her for a night. I found a blanket in a dumpster. I kept the bottle they had in the crib. I used tap water to make her formula last. Her voice cracked slightly. Then she started to get quiet. Too quiet. That's when I knew I had to find someone. So I walked to the city. I looked up your name. I remembered your picture from the wall in the shelter. I figured if anyone had power, it would be you. I didn't know if you'd help, but I hoped. Adrian felt something hollow and heavy settle in his chest. Why didn't you go to the police? Because they would have taken her, she said, and put me back in the system. And then she'd go back to the room with the cribs and the flickering lights. And I'd never see her again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things he couldn't fix and all the things she had already survived. Finally, he said, You saved her life. I didn't save her, Sophie said. I just didn't give up on her. That's what saving looks like, Adrian replied. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep with Ella nestled against her side, Adrian sat in his office reading through the full report Fiona had emailed him. It was a detailed account of Sophie's background, as much as they had been able to piece together. She had entered the system at age 4 after her mother's arrest. No father listed. Her placements had changed 6 times in 3 years. Her last shelter had no record of her leaving. No one had filed a missing child report. No one had noticed she was gone. The report ended with a recommendation if no known relatives could be identified and no legal guardian emerged. Sophie would be returned to state custody pending evaluation. Adrian stared at the screen for a long time. Then he opened a new file and began typing. He drafted a formal declaration of intent to file for joint guardianship of Sophie and temporary custody of Ella, citing emergency circumstances and documented failure of state care facilities. He copied his lawyer. He copied Fiona. He included every photo, every doctor's note, every testimony he had gathered. It was not a plea. It was a statement. He wasn't asking permission to care. He was daring them to stop him. By the time the sun crept over the skyline, he had written a 20-page dossier titled Evidence of Care. And in the subject line, he typed 7 words. She came to me. I stayed. He pressed send and leaned back in his chair. Down the hall, Sophie stirred and let out a soft whisper in her sleep. Adrian couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tone. It was the sound of someone starting to believe the door might not open the other way again, and that maybe for the first time she wouldn't be pushed through it. The 6th morning began with something that had become almost ordinary. Sophie humming softly in the quiet space between breakfast and Ella's first nap. It was not a melody meant for performance. It came from somewhere deeper, from memory, from muscle, from the place where words had long since run out. She sat on the edge of the couch, Ella wrapped in her arms, her bare feet tucked beneath her, her hair falling loosely around her face. The song was simple, only a few notes, but it settled the baby instantly. Even Adrian, standing in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee, paused to listen without making a sound. She had never sung it out loud before. Until now, it had been only a hum, a suggestion. This morning it became something more, soft lyrics carried on the edge of her breath, barely above a whisper. Sleep now, little light stars are always near. Morning waits with open arms, no more things to fear. Adrian leaned against the counter and closed his eyes for a second. He knew that song. Not just the melody, not just the rhythm, but every word. He had heard it once before, 5 years earlier, in the most unexpected of places. It was during a shelter inspection he had not intended to attend. Grace Navarro had been leading the West Haven site then, her first time in charge of a full facility. She had been young, blunt opinionated, and constantly at odds with his regional supervisors. But that day, Adrian had walked through the halls unannounced and found her alone in the common room cradling a baby no one else could calm. She had sung that same song unaware anyone was listening. The baby had quieted instantly, her sobs replaced by the steady rhythm of breathing. Adrian had paused then too. Something about Grace had unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in the way only people with real conviction can unsettle those who prefer to live at arm's length from the world. After that visit, Grace's reports had grown more pointed. She had pushed back harder. Written complaints refused to sign off on new intake quotas. She was gone within 2 months. Her resignation, buried in a wave of redacted emails, had been explained away by regional management as personal burnout. Adrian hadn't questioned it then. He had moved on, as he always did. But he remembered that song. He approached Sophie gently, not wanting to interrupt. "Where did you learn that?" he asked softly. Sophie looked up, still rocking Ella. Grace sang it. Only at night. Only when the babies couldn't sleep. "That's how you remember it. That's how Ella remembers it," Sophie said. "She stops crying when I sing it, even if she's hurting." Adrian sat on the floor near them, folding his legs beneath him like he used to when he needed to think through a problem. "Do you know what happened to Grace?" Sophie shook her head. "One day she was there, the next, she wasn't. The staff told us she quit. But one of the older girls said she saw her crying in the stairwell the night before. Then a man came with a briefcase. After that, Grace was gone and things got worse." "A man with a briefcase," Adrian repeated. "Did anyone say who he was?" "They said he worked for the company," Sophie said. "Said he was cleaning up trouble." Adrian felt a chill crawl along the back of his neck. He stood cross to his office and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside were dozens of old files, original contracts, and printed emails from his early shelter expansions. He found the West Haven folder and opened it. Paper after paper passed through his hands until he saw it. A signed directive from regional administration authorizing Grace's release from duty after an internal meeting. The signature at the bottom wasn't his. It belonged to someone else. Edward Leland, one of his former regional directors, long since retired, with a golden parachute and a handshake. Adrian hadn't known about the meeting. He had been out of the country that week, attending a summit in Berlin. Leland had acted in his absence and never mentioned it afterward. Grace had been pushed out quietly, and the song she sang had almost disappeared with her. Until now. He returned to the living room, gripping the papers in his hand. "Do you remember anything else about Grace?" he asked. Sophie hesitated. She had a notebook. She wrote everything down. She said if no one listened, at least the pages would. But I don't know what happened to it. Did she ever mention family? Anyone close? She had a picture in her locker. A woman with a baby. She said it was her sister and her niece. But I think it was her. I think she was hiding the truth. Adrian nodded slowly. "Do you think Grace is Ella's mother?" Sophie looked down at the sleeping baby. "I think Ella knows her voice. And I think babies remember." That afternoon, Adrian made a series of calls, not to lawyers or media consultants, but to old employees he hadn't spoken to in years. He tracked down former shelter staff assistants, even janitorial contractors. Most remembered Grace. One man, a night guard named Martin Alvarez, recalled seeing her leave in tears. "She didn't want to go," he said over the phone. "She said someone threatened to report her to the state board. Said she was hiding a baby that wasn't supposed to be there. She packed up and disappeared. I never saw her again." Adrian's search led him through dead numbers, bounced emails, and private investigators who demanded too much money for too little certainty. But late that evening, Dana returned with a lead. A contact in the nonprofit world had mentioned a woman matching Grace's description working at a remote facility in the northern part of the state under a different name. The place was a private recovery home run by a small collective. No press. No corporate involvement. "They say she calls herself Annie now," Dana said. But the way they described her voice, her hair, Her way of calming kids who've been through too much. It sounds like grace. Adrian sat back in his chair. Do they know about Ella? No one there's mentioned a baby. If she is the mother, she's never said it. That night, Adrian stood outside Sophie's door with the information printed on a slip of paper in his hand. He knocked gently. Sophie opened the door, still holding Ella, her eyes heavy but alert. I found her, Adrian said. I think I found Grace. Sophie didn't react at first. Then her grip on Ella tightened just a little. Is she okay? She's safe. But she's somewhere far working under another name. I don't know if she knows Ella is alive, or if she's hiding for a reason. Sophie looked down at the baby, then back up at him. Are you going to tell her? Only if you want me to, Adrian said. This isn't just about facts anymore. This is about what's right. And I won't make that decision without you. Sophie stepped back into the room, motioning for him to follow. She laid Ella in the crib and stood beside it, arms folded across her chest. If she's Ella's mom, Sophie said slowly, then she didn't leave her. They took her away. That matters. It does, Adrian agreed. And if she's scared, we don't rush her. We show her this is a safe way back. And if she doesn't want to come, Sophie's voice trembled. Then we still let Ella know someone sang for her once, Adrian said. And we keep singing. Sophie nodded, then sat on the edge of the bed. Can we wait a little, I want to think. Of course, Adrian said. We wait until you're ready. As he turned to leave, Sophie stopped him with a question. Why do you care so much? Adrian paused in the doorway. Because I used to care from a distance. I used to think that was enough. And then you showed up and proved me wrong. Sophie didn't answer. But when he left the room, he heard the melody again drifting out into the hallway like a thread that hadn't yet been cut. The same lullaby, the same soft voice. And in the quiet, a man who had once walked away from responsibility sat down in the dark and listened like his life depended on it, because now it did. Just a breath. Every subscriber makes a difference. Please consider subscribing to help us keep this channel alive. Let's return to the story. The seventh day began with a quiet rhythm that felt less like coincidence and more like a new way of living. The apartment no longer echoed with the sterile silence Adrian had grown used to. Instead, it was filled with soft noises. Ella's gentle coos, Sophie's careful steps in the hallway, the hum of the bottle warmer, the faint brush of pencil on paper. Nothing loud, nothing that demanded attention, but everything meaningful. The kind of sounds that only existed where people stayed long enough to be noticed. Adrian had woken earlier than usual, not because of work or calls, but because he wanted to check on them. He found Sophie already awake, her hoodie zipped up to her chin, sitting cross-legged by the window with Ella on her lap. The baby was wide-eyed, clutching the corner of a soft blanket, and Sophie was talking to her in a low voice, pointing out the shape of the buildings beyond the glass. That one's sharp like a triangle, she said, and that one's round like your bottle. Ella gurgled, fascinated by everything and nothing. Adrian stepped closer. Teaching her geometry, Sophie didn't look up, teaching her that the world is bigger than walls, and that it doesn't always stay scary. That's a better lesson, Adrian said. He poured a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter watching them. He had always believed that purpose came from creation-building companies, systems, networks of care. But now, watching a girl trace the skyline for a baby who might not understand the words, he wondered if purpose had always been simpler than that. Maybe it was about presence, about choosing not to leave, even when no one would blame you if you did. Later that morning, Dana returned with news. She stepped into the living room with an energy that was quieter than usual, the kind that carried something heavy. I called the shelter, she said, handing Adrian a piece of paper. The one where Grace is staying. They confirmed she works there, but they didn't give details, just said she was helping with recovery work. She uses the name Annie G. Adrian nodded, staring at the name. Sophie stood near the couch listening. Is she still singing? She asked. Dana paused. One of the women there said she leads evening lullaby sessions for the little ones. Same song. Sophie let out a breath like she had been holding it in all morning. Then it's her. Adrian sat down. I want to see her, but I don't want to surprise her. She might be hiding for a reason. She's not hiding, Sophie said. She's healing. That's different. Adrian looked at her. Would you come with me? Sophie glanced at Ella. Only if she comes too. Of course, he said. We go together. They left just after noon. Dana drove. The shelter was located in a quiet town nestled between hills far from the noise and glass of the city. The road curved gently around sleepy trees, and Sophie watched the world pass with a stillness Adrian couldn't quite explain. She didn't ask questions. She didn't fidget. She just held Ella and waited. When they arrived, the building was small, covered in faded yellow paint, with flower beds lining the walkway. A woman with gray braids met them at the door. Her name was Mira, and she spoke with the kind of softness that made even the air feel lighter. You're here about Annie, she said. She's in the music room. We just finished lunchtime lullabies. She doesn't know we're coming, Adrian said, and I don't want to upset her. Mira nodded. She'll be surprised, but not upset. She always said her voice would find its way back to someone. They followed her down a narrow hallway. The floors creaked gently beneath their feet, and the walls were lined with drawings, crayon stars, stick figures holding hands, suns with uneven smiles. At the end of the hall was a small open door. Inside, a woman sat with her back turned, humming as she organized a basket of rattles and fabric books. Her hair was shorter now, pulled back in a low knot, and her frame thinner. But the sound, Adrian recognized it instantly. The lullaby. The same one Sophie had sung. The same one Ella always responded to. Sophie took a step forward, holding Ella tightly. The woman turned slowly at the sound of movement. Her eyes found Sophie first. Then the baby. Then Adrian. She didn't speak. Not right away. She just stared at the baby, her mouth parting slightly. She's alive, she whispered. Sophie nodded. She remembers your voice. Grace's knees gave slightly, and she reached for the edge of the chair to steady herself. I thought they took her. I thought I lost everything. Adrian stepped forward. You didn't. Sophie made sure of that. Grace looked at him, her expression flooded with disbelief. She came to me, Adrian said, and I stayed. Grace's eyes filled, and she reached a trembling hand toward Ella, who blinked at her with the unbothered curiosity of a baby who had known love in every version of a song. Her name was never supposed to be erased, Grace said. I gave her that keychain. They told me she would be placed with a family, that I couldn't keep her, that I wasn't stable. But I knew something was wrong. I tried to fight, but they silenced me. They said if I caused trouble, I'd never see her again. Sophie stepped closer. They lied. But I found her, and she never forgot your song. They sat together on the floor of the music room, a circle of people who had come together, not by blood but by persistence. Grace told them everything. About the day the administrators came with forms and threats. About the night she left with only her suitcase and her guilt. About the months she spent in shelters herself, trying to start over, waiting for a miracle she didn't think would come. I never thought I'd hear that song again, she said. Until now. She still sleeps to it, Adrian said. It's her rhythm. It's the only thing I had left to give. Grace replied. But maybe it was enough. By the time they left the shelter, the sun had already dipped low behind the hills. Grace walked them out to the car, her fingers brushing against Ella's blanket one more time before she stepped back. You don't have to decide anything right now, Adrian said. We just wanted you to know she's okay. You didn't just bring her back, Grace said. You brought me back too. Sophie stood beside Adrian, her hand in his. She's safe now. We all are. But it doesn't have to end here. Grace nodded, her voice thick. If you'll have me, I'd like to be part of her life again. We'd like that, Adrian said. So would she. That night, back at the apartment, Sophie laid Ella in her crib and sat beside her until her breathing slowed. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching the two of them. She knew my name, Sophie said quietly. Grace. She remembered me too. You made sure she could, Adrian replied. And now maybe we can all remember together. Sophie reached down and pulled a drawing from under the crib. She handed it to him. It was a picture of the music room, a baby in the center, 3 figures around her, one with long hair, one in a suit, one in a hoodie. At the top she had written in bold block letters, "We came back singing." Adrian looked at it for a long time. Then he pinned it to the wall above the crib. A new kind of memory, a new kind of home, and a song that would never end. The 8th day began not with silence but with laughter. It was light and unsteady, the kind of laughter that bubbles up from a place still learning how to trust joy again. It came from Sophie, not loud, but unmistakable, drifting from the living room where she sat cross-legged on the rug beside Ella. The baby had discovered the crinkle in a new toy Dana had brought the day before, and was squealing in delight every time Sophie mimicked the sound with her mouth. The baby's arms waved like startled birds, and for the first time since they met, Sophie's face broke into something fully unguarded, a smile so open it startled Adrian when he walked into the room. He stood in the doorway holding a tray with tea and toast, not wanting to interrupt whatever spell had been cast. The morning sun pooled through the wide windows, washing the floor in soft gold. It looked like something out of a photograph, the kind people frame without needing to say anything about them. Sophie looked up and saw him. She didn't hide the smile. She didn't pull away from Ella or wrap herself in that oversized hoodie like armor. Instead, she waved him in. "She thinks the toy is talking," Sophie said, "but I think it's the sound. It reminds her of the paper they used to wrap bottles in." She always calmed when she heard it crinkle. "Babies remember more than we think," Adrian replied, setting the tray down. "So do older girls," Sophie said, "but they learn how to hide it. They ate breakfast at the table, a rhythm they no longer questioned." Ella gnawed on a soft spoon while Sophie watched her with the gaze of someone who had memorized every sigh, every blink, every sound. After a while, she turned to Adrian. "When are we going to see her again?" she asked. "Grace," she added. "Not a doctor or a lawyer, just Grace." Adrian took a breath. "I called her this morning. She's coming here. Today." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. "Here she wants to see where Ella's been, where you've been. She said if she's going to step into your lives again, she wants to do it the right way. No surprises, no pressure, just presence." Sophie nodded. "She deserves that." "You do too," Adrian said. Sophie didn't reply right away, but her fingers reached for Ella's, and the baby's hand wrapped around hers without hesitation. When Grace arrived later that afternoon, she didn't bring flowers or gifts or expectations. She brought herself in jeans and a worn sweater, hair pulled back and eyes wide open. Adrian met her at the door. "You found her," she said, looking past him to where Sophie and Ella sat on the couch. "No," Adrian replied. "She found me. I just didn't look away." Grace stepped inside slowly, almost reverently, and knelt beside the couch. Sophie held Ella a little tighter at first, but then she leaned forward and gently placed the baby in Grace's arms. Ella blinked up at the woman, her face full of that same quiet curiosity she always carried. Grace cradled her like someone memorizing the weight of something they'd only held once in a dream. "Hi," she whispered. "I never stopped thinking about you." "Not one day." Ella made a soft sound in her throat, not quite a cry, not quite a word. Grace began to hum the song, and Ella stilled her head, falling gently against her shoulder. Sophie watched every second, not with jealousy or fear, but with something older, something that had survived the hard edge of abandonment and turned instead into a kind of watchful grace. "She still knows you," Sophie said. Grace looked at her eyes shining. "And you knew how to keep her safe. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to," Sophie replied. "Just don't disappear." They spent the afternoon in the quiet warmth of each other's company. Grace told stories, small ones, about Ella's birth, the lullaby she made up the night she held her for the first time, the way her tiny hand would twitch in her sleep. She didn't cry when she spoke, and she didn't sugarcoat the gaps. She said plainly that she had been forced out, that the system had treated her like a liability instead of a mother, that she had chosen survival when no one offered her the chance to stay and fight. I tried to follow the rules, she said, but the rules were built to push people like me out. So we made new rules, Sophie said quietly. We didn't ask permission. Adrian had listened without interrupting, but now he leaned forward. I'm filing the final documents this week. Joint guardianship. We can make it official if you want it. Grace looked at Sophie. Only if she agrees. I don't want to be something that gets decided for her again. Sophie studied her for a moment. Then she looked at Adrian. Will it change things? It'll give us legal ground, he said. It won't change where you sleep, who holds Ella, or who makes breakfast. That part is already real. Then yes, Sophie said. She should be in it. She always was, even when we couldn't see her. Later that night, after Grace had left with the promise to return tomorrow, Adrian found Sophie standing at the window holding one of her drawings. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the paper in her hand. I used to draw places I wished were real, she said. Rooms with soft chairs, windows that opened, cribs that didn't creak, people who said good morning and meant it. I thought if I drew them enough, I could live there in my head. And now Adrian asked. Now, she said, handing him the picture, I don't have to imagine them anymore. The drawing showed the apartment from above. 3 figures on the rug, a baby between them, 1 man in a chair, 1 woman with long hair, 1 girl holding a pencil. Overhead, a light shone down not from a lamp, but from something drawn in the shape of a star. At the top she had written, We weren't lost. We were just waiting to be found. Adrian felt something shift inside him, slow and permanent, like a building settling into its foundation after the final beam is set. He looked at Sophie. What do you want to do tomorrow? He asked. No appointments, no lawyers, just us. Sophie tilted her head, thinking. Can we go to the park? She asked. I want Ella to hear wind in the trees. Real wind, not through a window. Of course, he said. We'll pack a blanket. And sandwiches, Sophie added. Triangle ones, with the crusts cut off. You've got expensive taste, Adrian said. She grinned. I've been hanging around rich people. That night, as the city darkened around them, and the baby slept under a blanket of stars printed on soft cotton, Adrian sat beside Sophie and read from a book she had picked out. It was about a girl who built a treehouse that turned into a spaceship and carried her to places she didn't know she needed. When he finished, Sophie leaned her head against his arm. Do you think people can really start over? She asked. I think people can choose different, Adrian said. And that's almost the same thing. She nodded. Then maybe this is the different we chose, and we just keep choosing it. He tucked her in that night. No protests, no resistance, just a quiet good night, and the weight of her hand on Ella's back. As he turned off the light, he paused in the doorway. I'm proud of you, he said. Sophie didn't answer, but as he closed the door, he heard her humming again. The lullaby. The same one Grace had sung. The same one that had carried them through loss and silence and into something new. A song that didn't end. A promise that kept being made one note at a time. And in the next room, a man who had once believed he could fix everything with distance now understood that showing up, staying through the hard parts, and listening when no one else did that was what love sounded like. And that was what made a home. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Sometimes the most life-changing promises aren't shouted. They're whispered in lullabies drawn in crayon, or made silently by staying when no one else does. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. We read every word, and your stories matter too. And if you believe in second chances, in the kind of family that's chosen and built with care, and in the quiet kind of love that doesn't leave, please subscribe to our channel and tap the notification bell. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Your next emotional journey is waiting just one click away. Tap the video on your screen now. We promise it's one you will not forget. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next story.